Oh, I was there. Hated the day. The day was a miserable day. I mean, it was a...
Really? I thought...
Well, was it? Well, I can tell you now, it was the worst royal engagement I ever did, a royal wedding I ever did. You know, I thought to myself, you know, this is all showbiz rubbish.
You're absolutely right. I mean, what I discovered was, of course, that she was hunting for a man, and she targeted, there's no doubt she targeted Harry.
The whole thing was just stage managed to suit them.
This is not the Harry he was a few years ago, and the only reason he's not like that is he's following the requests of Meghan. He said himself, what Meghan wants, Meghan gets.
And so he was angry, and I felt, you know, we were punished for that.
Royal photographers and royal insiders have now pointed to some less flattering details surrounding Harry and Meghan's wedding. On television, it may have looked like a perfect fairy tale ceremony, but behind the polished images, there were reportedly tensions that were kept out of view. Those details are only now being discussed more openly. Arthur Edwards, a longtime royal photographer who has traveled with Queen Elizabeth and even King Charles, was there on the day. Given his close working history with the family, it was a major honor for him to attend, but he later suggested that Harry appeared frustrated with the staff and the press, and that his attitude toward them was viewed by some as harsh. Edwards also claimed Harry and Meghan did not really let him capture the moment properly.
And the photographers they engaged for the job was 5 feet away, you know, it was just hopeless. And then the carriage shot, when they went past me in the carriage, they looked the other way. So for me, it was a disaster. And
Well, was that deliberate? You were made to feel unwelcome
I
at the
felt
wedding?
so. I felt, it wasn't just me, it was the whole of the British press.
Before getting into the reported tension, Arthur also spoke about what he felt was poor planning behind the scenes. To make clear that he was not just another guest, but someone with what he described as a real connection to the royal household, he was said to have been required to wear his traditional royal outfit. The suit he wore was described as so oversized that it almost looked like winter formal wear, even though this was a summer wedding. Arthur described the heat at the venue as intense, and said staying in those heavy clothes for hours felt nearly unbearable. He also suggested that shade was supposed to be provided for the invited guests, but according to his account, that apparently never happened. Even some of the celebrities in attendance, according to accounts of the day, seemed to hit a limit. They were said to have stopped trying to stay perfectly composed and began fanning themselves with their wedding programs. So, it may not have been the polished, glamorous scene people saw on television. And with the sun beating down so hard, many guests may have been wishing they could have stayed home and watched the procession from afar instead of sitting through that heat.
When I think, you know, I've done some really lovely royal weddings. I did both Prince Charles, King Charles's weddings. I did William's wedding. I did Andrew's wedding. I did Sophie and Edward. You know, I mean, they were lovely occasions. But that today, I couldn't get out of Windsor quick enough. I promise you that.
The worst royal wedding.
Then the wedding planners entered the picture. At first, they were reportedly given a specific guest count to work with, so every detail was organized around those numbers. They even appeared to build in a small buffer for a few surprise additions, just to be safe. But, according to Arthur Edwards, things supposedly took an unexpected turn when Meghan was said to have quietly brought in celebrity friends like Oprah, Elton John, Tyler Perry, and several others the planners had not been expecting. If that account is accurate, it appears to have left the team scrambling, because the event suddenly seemed far bigger and more complicated than they had planned for, and the last-minute additions reportedly created a wave of logistical headaches. And that is part of why this story keeps getting attention online, because it is not just about one hot day or a few awkward moments. It is about the way the whole event is now being re-examined through these behind-the-scenes claims. Some viewers say the details make the wedding feel a lot less effortless than it looked on television, while others argue that large events often run into unexpected pressure and last-minute changes. Either way, the reaction shows how quickly a polished public image can be questioned once people start talking about what may have happened off-camera. What stood out most in the conversation was that these were not random complaints. They were reportedly coming from someone with long royal experience, which is why the discussion spread so fast. And once that kind of account enters the mix, every small detail starts to feel bigger than it did before.
Events that happened on the actual wedding day itself. The guest list beyond the lone family member she invited was simply inviting celebrities who were total strangers to her. I could see, especially with a wedding of this scale, inviting a handful of people who you do not know, but certainly not to this extent. There were a huge amount of guests who she had never met. Some people didn't even come. Like, for example, Reese Witherspoon said, "Why would I go? I don't even know them."
As difficult as the heat and the reportedly uneven planning were, the seating arrangement added another layer to the discussion. For a photographer, the right seat can be one of the biggest advantages because it gives you a clear view of the most important moments. But according to online chatter around the wedding, that was not necessarily how things unfolded. Some high-profile royal figures, including people who had spent years serving the crown, were said to have been placed farther back in the venue, while Meghan's celebrity friends, who were not part of royal life or public duties in the United Kingdom, were reportedly seated closer to the front. To some viewers, that looked like a strange choice, with long-serving royal names seemingly pushed aside while well-known guests got the best view. Arthur Edwards also said he ended up seated among lesser-known royals, and he described the experience as if he were following the ceremony through a GPS app, which suggested just how far back he felt he had been placed.
All my life, and then Oprah Winfrey had met them once. She was a guest. The Clooneys, the guests. I mean, never met them before, but they were the guests. And, I thought to myself, this is all showbiz rubbish.
Even after the wedding, the controversy did not just fade away. Arthur said that Harry and Meghan's choice to step back from the royal family became especially clear when they made their first major public appearance after the ceremony. Instead of settling into traditional royal duties, they sat down for the Oprah interview and publicly shared what they described as frustrations. They alleged that racism and unfair treatment were widespread inside the royal family, but Arthur did not appear convinced by that version of events and openly questioned those claims. Online, some people also speculated that Meghan may have invited Oprah to the wedding because they believed it could lead to a future favor, though that idea remains unverified and appears to be based on chatter rather than confirmed facts.
Most of that interview was left on the cutting room floor because it was so one-sided and it was so unfair. And I think about watching it now and the visit about Archie and the colour of his skin, and I knew they'd be seething. I knew the Queen would be seething. I knew that the Prince of Wales, Prince Charles would be seething. It would be.
Then Tom Bauer entered the conversation, and, according to the online discussion around his comments, he did not hold back. The first thing he pointed to about the wedding was his view that the marriage may not have been entirely about love at all. In his telling, Meghan appeared to have been highly strategic from the start. Bauer suggested it was not just a random meeting that brought her and Harry together. He argued that, for a long time, she had reportedly been looking for someone with a higher social standing, someone who was not only wealthy, but also influential. So when Harry came into the picture, Bauer claimed it may have given Meghan the ideal opening to end her previous marriage to Trevor Engelson and start a relationship with the prince. And that is exactly why the discussion has kept circling back online, because once people start reading the wedding through that lens, every detail seems to take on a different meaning. What may have looked like a simple private decision to some viewers starts to look, to others, like part of a much bigger strategy, even though none of that has been officially confirmed. Supporters of the couple would obviously see it differently, but critics have continued to argue that the public image and the behind-the-scenes version of events did not quite match up. That gap between appearance and perception is what keeps these stories alive. The more people compare the polished ceremony to the reported tensions, seating choices, and post-wedding interviews, the more the conversation shifts from one moment to the bigger pattern people think they see. And in that kind of atmosphere, even small comments from insiders or commentators can spark another round of debate, especially when the claims remain disputed online rather than settled.
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, what I discovered was, of course, that she was hunting for a man in England from 2013 onwards, when her marriage had crashed and she couldn't find anyone in Canada at the time. And she wanted wealth and she wanted fame. And there's no doubt she targeted Harry and found someone who was a childhood friend of his who could introduce them. And then on the days before they met at their blind meeting in a club in London, She researched Harry very carefully and knew exactly what buttons to press.
In a relatively short span of time, online discussion suggested Harry was pushed to move toward marriage very quickly. Even when Prince William was said to have warned him not to rush such a major decision, Harry apparently did not take that advice. Instead, the focus shifted to Meghan's apparent urgency to move things forward, with online commentary suggesting she wanted the wedding to happen so she could begin moving in circles with some of the most influential people in the world. Then, when Meghan allegedly saw growing pushback around certain parts of the wedding, Bauer claimed she came up with another plan. According to his version of events, she wanted Harry's complete attention and loyalty. He said Meghan allegedly persuaded Harry that many of his close friends and longtime allies did not need to attend, because she wanted the ceremony centered mainly on the two of them. Harry reportedly went along with that idea. What should have been a wedding surrounded by close friends and family instead became, according to that discussion, an event where several of Harry's longtime friends were left out. That leaves an obvious question hanging in the air. What do you call a wedding when many of the groom's closest friends are not there at all?
How on earth can he stay with her? And the same then happened when they went to Tommy Inskip's wedding in Jamaica, which is a great friend of Harry's, who in the end was banned from the dinner after their wedding.
Yeah, well, I know at least 3 of the very good friends were apparently
banned, all by Meghan.
And then they saw all these celebrities filing it.
Exactly.
Who'd known her about 3 minutes.
Yeah, if that.
Then there were the celebrity guests Meghan was reportedly said to have invited to the wedding. According to Bauer, this was part of a much wider plan. If royal life did not unfold the way she hoped, he suggested she may have wanted to build stronger ties inside the entertainment world, giving herself another lane to lean on later. The guest list was filled with A-list names, and at the time, many people seemed to view it as Meghan bringing a bit of her Hollywood circle into royal life. But Bauer argued it may have been more deliberate than that. In his account of events, the wedding reportedly offered a chance to build early connections, strengthen valuable relationships, and meet influential people long before anyone publicly knew Harry and Meghan would eventually step back from royal duties. Online, that interpretation has kept the conversation going, even though the claim remains disputed and no official confirmation has supported it.
She's a creature of Hollywood. She knows that celebrity images is what earns the money, and that's what she must protect.
The wedding that was celebrated around the world would later be seen by some observers as the starting point of a much bigger conflict. Before that day, relations inside the royal family appeared, at least on the surface, to be relatively calm. But just a few months later, the tone seemed to have shifted completely. Harry then released Spare, which brought a number of private family matters into the public conversation. After that, he and Meghan took part in the Oprah interview, where they spoke at length about the royal family. Later came their Netflix projects, which brought even more personal family issues into the spotlight. According to Bauer, the lines were drawn after the wedding, and he has suggested the ceremony eventually became tied to the beginning of a long-running dispute between the Sussexes and the monarchy. And that is why this conversation has stayed so active online, because people are not just reacting to one wedding anymore, they are re-examining the entire story around it. Once a ceremony becomes part of a larger debate about image, loyalty, and public positioning, even ordinary details start getting read like clues. That does not mean every claim is settled, and the allegations remain disputed online, but it does explain why commentators keep returning to the same moments and asking what may have been happening behind the scenes. For supporters, this kind of talk can feel like old criticism being recycled. For critics, it is another sign that the polished version of events may have left out a lot. And because so much of it remains disputed, the discussion keeps shifting between reaction, interpretation, and speculation. That is exactly what gives these royal stories so much staying power, especially when the people involved continue to draw public attention long after the original event.
I thought that was just so disgraceful, what she said, what Harry said, and I'm a monarchist, and I just don't think she should have been allowed to say those things unchallenged by Oprah Winfrey. It was scandalous. So I embarked on this book to actually understand what sort of person actually launches that sort of unfair, untrue attack on the royal family.
Then, Angela Levin was not buying it either. She also weighed in and pointed to several other details about the wedding that some people say still catch audiences off guard today. Levin was working on Prince Harry's biography in 2017, and near the end of that project, she visited Harry to wrap things up. But when she arrived at his residence, she reportedly had a moment that, according to her account, caught her completely by surprise. According to Levin, one of the prince's aides reportedly pulled her aside and gave her a serious warning, telling her to be very careful because Harry allegedly seemed extremely anxious whenever Meghan came up in conversation. The way she described it, he was said to become nervous very quickly whenever his relationship with Meghan was mentioned, which added another layer to the growing online discussion around that period.
If she wants to speak, if she wants to talk to someone before him, he steps back. He's very nervous. And I think that she commands it all, quite obviously, because this is not the Harry he was a few years ago. And the only reason he's not like that is he's following the request of Meghan. He said himself, what Meghan wants, Meghan gets. And that's what it's like.
At that point, Harry's engagement to Meghan still had not been officially announced, even though wedding preparations were reportedly already in motion. According to Levin, an aide reportedly pulled her aside and gave her what she described as a clear warning, saying that if she brought up Meghan or pushed too many questions about her, Harry could reportedly become visibly upset and might even ask her to leave. Levin treated that as a major red flag and said she had already started noticing what she viewed as shifts in Harry's behavior. In her view, it seemed Meghan had already gained a great deal of influence over Harry before she had even formally joined the royal family.
And also she pushes Harry out the way, or she pulls him, if she wants to go and he's still talking, she pulls him and she gives him a look and he has to come with her. I don't think she realises that we all see that. Who does that?
Then came the tiara issue, and as Levin described it, not every royal tiara was seen as suitable for every occasion. She said Meghan had first asked to wear a striking emerald tiara that was believed to have Russian origins, and that request reportedly raised concerns behind the scenes. Some observers wondered why that particular piece would be chosen if it risked creating extra attention. The Queen is said to have declined the request, with the tiara reportedly carrying historical controversy tied to its post-Russian Revolution background. Meghan was said to still want to wear it, but Queen Elizabeth ultimately reportedly stepped in before the situation went any further. What makes these details keep resurfacing is that they feed into a much bigger online debate about how much of the royal story was carefully managed versus how much was happening in plain sight. Once people start looking at a wedding through that lens, even small moments get pulled apart and read as signs of tension, control, or shifting dynamics. That does not make the claims settled, but it does explain why commentators keep circling back to them. For some viewers, these accounts simply reinforce the idea that the public version of events was smoother than the private reality. For others, they are just more disputed recollections being viewed through hindsight. Either way, the discussion has stayed active because it connects to a pattern people think they see, one where the image looked polished, but reactions behind the scenes may have suggested a different story. And once that kind of narrative takes hold, it is hard to get the internet to stop talking about it.
Meghan had her heart set on this tiara with emeralds, and Prince Harry hit the roof when they were told it was impossible for her to wear. Provenance of the tiara could not be established. There were concerns that it could have come from Russia originally. There was a very heated exchange that prompted the Queen to speak to Harry. She said, Meghan cannot have whatever she wants. She gets what tiaras she's given by me.
According to Levin, being part of the royal family carries a huge amount of responsibility, and she suggested Meghan was not willing to fully take that on. That was her interpretation of the situation. Not a settled fact, but it added to the broader debate around how Meghan fit into royal life. Levin also said Queen Elizabeth remained composed when Harry and Meghan later stepped back from royal duties. While the Queen may have been disappointed, Levin argued she was not completely taken by surprise. In her view, that made Meghan's departure appear less like a sudden reaction to alleged mistreatment and more like part of a plan that may have been building for some time. Levin further maintained that the Queen treated people fairly, no matter their rank, and she suggested Meghan and the royal family were ultimately headed in very different directions.
And I think that Meghan never wants to come back here because she hated the country and she hated being a member of the royal family. And she's not someone who wants to take sixth position. Harry's sixth in line to the throne. She didn't like that. She wants to be out there in front. So she doesn't want to come.
Meghan Markle is described by Levin as having a significant amount of influence over Harry. She argues that Harry reportedly rarely makes major decisions without first checking in with Meghan, and that if she is not on board with an idea, it is unlikely to move ahead. That interpretation has fueled plenty of online discussion about how their dynamic works behind closed doors. Levin also suggests that Meghan may have become the main decision-maker in the marriage. She even claims Meghan helps shape many of Harry's speeches and may have a hand in guiding much of his public messaging. In Levin's view, that goes beyond ordinary support and suggests a much deeper level of influence within the relationship, though those claims remain part of the broader commentary rather than anything officially confirmed, and the allegations remain disputed online.
Of course he's scared of Meghan. He's terrified of her. I think he would have gone away a long time ago. I think she's completely controlling him. And you see now that he's absolutely used to being behind her.
And that is the picture royal commentators have been painting when they talk about the wedding of Harry and Meghan, along with the details they believe may have been unfolding behind the polished public image. If the tiara story and the backstage tension really suggest anything, it is how much remains debated years later. If this breakdown gave you something to think about, like, subscribe, share, and comment with your take, and see you on the next one.